when I handed over the economy to Donald Trump, we had had 75 straight months of job growth. And I said, here you go. And all he did with it was give a tax cut to people who did not need one. And drove up the deficit in the process. And now he wants to do it again.
Hi again, everyone. 5 o'clock in New York. A huge pillar of the 2024 campaign was this fight over prosperity. And central to Donald Trump's campaign and candidacy, and now what will become his second term as president, is the promise that the American voter bought of a better economy than they have now under Biden. And yet, with the stuff that Donald Trump has said out loud and from the podium and in white papers that he has said he's going to do, experts and economists say that those things, that stuff, will have the opposite effect. Reporting in the New York Times finds this, quote, the S&P 500 is on a 6-day winning streak as investors pile into the Trump trade rally on expectations that the president-elect will cut taxes and red tape and bolster growth. But alarm bells are ringing even inside the banks. Some Wall Street economists continue to warn that Donald Trump's plans for tariffs and tax cuts will reignite inflation and add to the deficit. And even as his allies say the market rally shows that the traditional experts are wrong, don't be surprised if the president-elect finds that tighter economic conditions and a restive bond market force a rethink of his agenda. The tariffs that Trump so proudly touts as the answer to everything, the answer to rising prices, could actually make prices rise more, make stuff more expensive than it is today. Washington Post reports that economists estimate this, quote, if President-elect Donald Trump follows through with sweeping new tariffs on anything made in China, your next iPhone could cost roughly $300 more, end quote. And while we do not know with Trump if he's ever going to do the stuff he says he's going to do, he's going to go through with the tariffs could hurt U.S. producers as well, especially farmers, something Claire McCaskill mentioned yesterday. On that, the Wall Street Journal reports this, quote, China is the largest buyer of U.S. agricultural exports, making Trump's proposals to institute new tariffs on shipments from China coming to the U.S. the largest open question. Quote, grain farmers have bad memories of the last trade war. That's according to Phil Flynn, senior market analyst with Price Futures Group. The first trade bout between the U.S. and China in 2018 resulted in losses of more than $27 billion for U.S. agricultural exports, according to a report by the National Corn Growers Association and American Soybeans Association. The open question remains for a country where a majority of our fellow Americans, a majority of voters, said that the economy was the issue they voted on, the reason they sent Trump back. Will Trump's stated policies on the economy make their lives worse? That question is where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. MSNBC senior contributing editor Michelle Norris is here with me at the table. MSNBC host and correspondent Ali Velshi and host of the On Brand podcast, Donnie Deutsch, is here. Donnie, just start, because you and I talked all the time about sort of perception versus reality, and you know, change is an inescapable political aphrodisiac, and rage about the economy was something that Biden and then Harris just could not push back against.
Yeah. The tariff question is a big question. And obviously, you know, if I talk to my friends who manufacture stuff, they say it's very simple on a tariff. If this cup costs $10 and you put a 20% tariff on it, well, the consumer now is paying $12 for it. The question is how real is it going to be, and is he going to do tariffs across the board? I think a lot of his tariffs was bluster to kind of say, I'm going to get China in line, because I think the deficit is just going to get so crazy at a certain point. So the street, my friends, are giddy, because the street is loving what's happening. They see less regulation. They see top down. It's a TBD what it means for the consumer. This is clearly what the consumer voted on. Tariffs don't necessarily solve inflation going in. Conceptually, they go in the other direction. We're going to see.
Allie.
Yeah, these two things, this inflation versus tariffs issue, is complicated. Tariffs, for all of history, competing factions have tried to make trade deals with each other, right? It's what the Silk Road was all about. For all of history, you've tried to make these deals. The ones that we have with Mexico, the ones we have with Canada, hard fought over decades. To now suggest, you're talking about agriculture, Canada put certain restrictions on U.S. dairy. It killed farmers. It was really hard. So if you put tariffs on other people, they put tariffs on you. That's the bottom line. This is a two-way world. There are instances in which tariffs are very useful when you want people to do better with human rights, when you want them to raise wages so that you're more competitive with them. But this doesn't seem like a sophisticated approach. So you've got deregulation on one side, and you're really right about that. If you're one of these people who hates Lena Khan at the FTC and just wants to be able to merge and buy companies, this is probably going to be a pretty good 4 years for you. But tariffs cause inflation, and inflation, as you know, is much harder to deal with than a recession. Recession, we know, you cut rates, you put some stimulus in the economy, it 100% of the time works. You get out of a recession. You get stuck in an inflation round, you could be stuck in this for decades. The Fed has done a pretty good job of this thing. That doesn't help people whose price of eggs are more than they were 4 years ago. But in terms of the methodology for fighting inflation, this Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell have been doing, if not the popular thing, probably what turns out to be the right thing.
Is that why he's in Donald Trump's sights to fire?
Yeah, because it's easier to say. If he gets out, I can lower your interest rates. Well, you can't do all these things together. You can't lower your interest rates, increase tariffs, and hope inflation goes down. And if inflation was as driving a force as it seems to have been in this election, his answers are the wrong ones for the question.
There's another question about inflation. It was lowering the corporate tax rates to 15%. The arguments from the top down is, well, it's going to stimulate businesses. They're going to make money. They're going to hire more people. The other argument is, geez, it's going to just continue to put our deficit to the roof because we're not going to be able to compensate.
Because they did last time, too.
And so these are things that economists are arguing about, and we are going to see.
Michelle, Vice President Harris tried to make this argument to the country. She narrowed the gap on the question of the economy, obviously not enough. What is your sort of sense of the conversations in the Democratic Party about how to re-engage the American worker, the American voter on the issue of the economy and get back on offense?
Well, the Democrats are going to be engaged in a months-long after-action report to look carefully at the results and figure out how to connect with voters on this issue. If you look at what people were saying about her campaign before the election, people were describing this as a perfect campaign against the odds. They thought they were reaching out to these voters, and they weren't. We're just hearing the guests talk about, how Wall Street is responding to this. If Donald Trump is looking to get attaboys and, backslapping from his friends on Wall Street, he might get that based on the performance of the S&P right now. But if you look at what's happening in people's lives, this is the time of the year when people have that jar on the kitchen counter where they're just stocking away a little bit of extra money so they can afford Christmas gifts, so they can afford to have a nice holiday. He has a very difficult time in trying to deliver for people who are going to be tracking the price of eggs and the price of bacon and the price of housing. And if he cannot do that quickly, particularly after the holidays, when people are going to be feeling the holiday hangover after spending so much, he's going to have a rough start to his administration. As for the Democrats, they're going to have to figure out how to message to people and how to connect with people. And I don't, there's a lot of talk about how Democrats talk to normal people. I don't necessarily like that language because it suggests that there are people who are normal and then, there's everybody else. I think they have to figure out how to let people know that they care about the condition that they're in, that they actually can signal not just with policy, but make people, because that's what, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did this interesting experiment on Instagram, and she asked people, tell me why you voted for me, but also voted for Donald Trump. And the answers she got were interesting in that people said, both of you seem to care about us. Both of you seem to show us that you understood our plight. And that was a very big surprise to a lot of Democrats who thought they were reaching and thought they were connecting with people and realizing that they really just weren't.
I mean, I went out after Trump was elected the first time to Erie, PA, to the counties that flipped from Obama, Trump. And it was this promise, right, because he hadn't been president yet, but it was also this cultural resonance of Trump's rage against the machine. Yep. I think what seems to have, and listen, you shouldn't have to effort feeling people's economic pain. You should walk down the aisle of a grocery store, and no matter where you are, you'll see people who are struggling to make choices. Right. I mean, a box of cereal is $11. A carton of milk is $7. Yep. Pack of chicken breast can go up to $19, yep, depending if you go with organic or non, and then you stand there and you're like, am I a bad mother if I buy the non-organic chicken? I mean, shopping for food has become really stressful, and I think that the idea that Trump is the answer is the part of it that people have to understand, because there's no way Trump knows the cost of anything.
But all through history, American history, most elections, the economy still turns out to be the number one issue.
It really does. You know, we all drift off around this table.
Right.
It's going to be this, it's going to be this. It's the price of eggs.
And so here's the thing. All over the world, every incumbent government, almost every incumbent government in Western nations since the pandemic has been thrown out, right? Because they can't get over this particular part of it. Your eggs are still 20% more money than they were in 2020. You can have all sorts of reasons for it. You can say that America is leading the world in economic growth, which it is. You can say that America is down to 2% inflation, which it is. We have low unemployment, which it is. But if you're doing all those things you just described, paying for eggs and chicken and milk every week, the argument that the statistics are on your side is not the same as the recognition, but that this is tough for you. Your eggs will never be cheaper. The only way your eggs will be cheaper in America is if the economy collapses.
And let's understand, the reason we have inflation, frankly, is both administrations. Basically, we hit COVID. The world was going to end. And they had to just pump money. They did the right thing. Both administrations.
Correct.
Like, we're here, and you could have just said, we're going to.
And everybody in the world did it.
And we had to do it. And so here's where we are. And I'm concerned that inflation is just not going to be going away.
Which is why you got to stick to it. And that's what Donald Trump is suggesting he won't with the Fed. I mean, Jerome Powell has said he will not quit. And it sounds like Trump doesn't want that fight. But inflation is hard to fight. And that's not a conversation you're going to have necessarily in Erie, Pennsylvania, but it's something people like you had in the White House. It's hard to fight. We haven't had it in 40 years, and now we've got it, and it's tough. It almost wrecked Japan. Japan was going to be the most important country in the world, and it's not now.
Let me read the latest reporting about this fight with Jerome Powell, because I think people were watching the national security agencies. I think Donald Trump has so sort of successfully steamrolled across all those norms. And I think this fight with Powell may actually be the new norm-busting question or hotspot that we're watching. This is the Wall Street Journal's reporting. Quote, when asked last week whether he would resign if asked to do so, Powell offered a one-word reply, quote, no. Powell, a former private equity executive who has a law degree, was later pressed to explain his rationale. He delivered another curt response, quote, not permitted under the law. His unflinching rejoinders laid bare the prospect that any attempt to force Powell to leave before his term ends in 2026 would likely be resolved in an unprecedented legal battle. Quote, if the president were to succeed at this, that would mean every future chair is subject to removal at the whim of the president, said Scott Alvarez, who served as the Fed's general counsel from 2004 to 17. I don't think that's a precedent Jay would want to set, and that's why I think he would fight it. This is a humongous precedent. I mean, the story of Trump is the story of precedent bursting and busting.
But there's money involved here.
And ramifications for the economy.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of wealthy people around him, smart business people around him, and I think this is one of the areas that you're not going to see busting of the norm. I think
I'm hoping the smart people around him tell him that the independence of a central bank is a tenet upon which all Western economies are built. The idea that you do not politicize the central bank. There are a lot of people who have a lot of beef with the Fed and the central bank, and that's valid. But the idea that it would come under political control by firing a Fed chair in the middle of their term, he got rid of the last Fed chair, but it was the end of it. He just didn't reappoint her. In this particular case, to actually try and fire someone, that would
what do you
spook.
Think? What's your
that would spook the banks. That would spook his Wall Street supporters. Unfortunately, it's still not a populist argument because nobody cares. Nobody knows what the term of the Fed chair is. They think that Jerome Powell was the person who was Trump's pick in the first place, which he was until he didn't do what Trump wanted him to do.
But it does affect the price of leasing a car or buying a car. I mean, it does affect everyone. I wonder, Donnie, how you sort of post-mortem the conversations around the economy, because really, I mean, I know from being in politics, the only people that have to work at connecting to the workers are the people who've lost touch in such dramatic ways that, I mean, that's, and I don't think that was, I mean, I read all the responses to AOC's post as well, and it was about feeling seen.
Yeah. Look, that's the one thing Trump, he had this magic that we can't figure out, that he is far removed from the average Joe as possible, yet somehow they think he's going to fight for him. I think a lot of it has to do with the way he talks. He talks like them. He's not polished. He's rough. He's around the edges. He says stupid things about Arnold Palmer. And people go, oh, he's like me. And there's this weird dynamic that I, as a marketer, cannot figure out. I understand. I see it. but it's the guy who lives in the most gilded, universe in the world relates to the guy on the street because he's going to fight for them. And, the Dems, and we're going to do so many postmortems, just that we've talked a lot about, just a lot of the issues that they were focused on. And it did not feel there's a reason that only 32% of people identify as Democrats now. It does not feel like they're in contact with, they're going to get my food prices down, they're going to protect my borders, the meat and potato issues that obviously made this election.
And the irony, Michelle, of course, is that if you look at, if you take the and we live in a country and we sort of cover politics where the personalities are so outsized. But if you take the names and faces off of them, the set of policies that actually helps address it were the policies under which Kamala Harris ran. What do you make of sort of the risk of overcorrecting? I mean, some of it is sort of an inability to sustain a message around the economy, an inability to separate herself from Joe Biden's approval ratings, which were historically low for anyone running as sort of a vice president after one term of an unpopular president. I mean, what is your sense of sort of the parameters of this Democratic autopsy?
I think that they're going to have to spend a lot of time doing this and figure out how to reach people that in ways that go beyond traditional focus groups and traditional polling. I mean, Kamala Harris at one point was telling a story. She said it to me personally once, and then it became part of her campaign, and several other reporters heard it, where she talked about when she imagined working class people as being someone, and people will relate to this if you've ever been to a party and you feel like the person that you're talking to is looking past you. They're looking over your shoulder, trying to figure out, who am I going to talk to next? You're not that important to me. I want to get to this other person. And it was a really potent example of how people felt. And I was surprised that maybe we didn't hear or see more of that in the campaign. But that's where a lot of voters feel right now, what a lot of voters feel, that the parties aren't seeing them, aren't understanding their pain. We've been talking about the price of eggs and the price of bacon. The other thing that's waiting out there is this silver tsunami of elderly people that are marching past middle age into their senior years, and how we are going to pay for that as individuals and as a country. And she tried to address that, for instance, with that $6,000 relief package. Again, it just didn't resonate with people, and that's one of the reasons why people are feeling it's not just the price of eggs, it's also, how am I going to pay for my kids' education and take care of mom and dad? There is this silver tsunami that is going to hit the economy like an iceberg as boomers move past middle age and into their senior years. And that's another piece of the economy. One of the reasons that Donald Trump, may have been successful is that in this fairy tale he told about how he's going to help people improve their lives, he cast himself as the hero, and then he had all kinds of villains. It was a bloated government. It was immigrants that were stealing your jobs. And in a threat assessment of the things that really impact people's lives and cause real threats, it's not immigrants. It's car accidents and cancer and maybe guns, but it's not immigrants taking your jobs. And a lot of these places where we're talking about seeing mass deportation, the unemployment rate is fairly low. So if you're pulling people out of the economy, who's going to replace them? But the reason that worked is because it gave voters someone that they could blame. Mm-hmm. My life is not, the way that I want it to be, and it's their fault. And he was very good at returning to that message again and again. It's somebody else's fault, and guess what? I'm the one who's going to make it better for you. And even when he rambled at his rallies, he came back to that same message over and over and over again. And apparently it resonated.
After break, I want to continue this because I have a very
You're so respectful of our break.
Well, because
Pat Perky is going to love you.
Guys in here. We're going to break. Don't even think about talking.
All right. So Donnie did my job for me there. I love this. We are going to sneak in a break. Ali Velshi, thank you for starting us off, making us smarter. When we come back, how Donnie will start us off on how Democrats can win again. A two-term governor from a state Donald Trump won by 30 points, lays out what could be the winning formula for his party going forward.
That suffer from PTSD. For the single moms working 2 jobs and raising their 3 kids. For the dads who have to miss bedtime because they want to work that extra shift. And for the kids sleeping on the floor, dreaming about a better America and a better future. This victory is for you. Thank you, Arizona.
That's what winning looked like Tuesday night. Democrats looking for under the couch cushions reasons to be optimistic this week and hopeful. Don't have to look farther than that. That was in the battleground state of Arizona, because after days of uncertainty, NBC News now projects that Congressman Ruben Gallego is on his way to the United States Senate. He will be the first Latino from the state to do so ever. It'll be Gallego, not Republican Kari Lake, who will take over for Kyrsten Sinema, which means the number of seats held by Democrats will now be 47, with one race yet to be called. Gallego's victory is especially impressive when you consider that Trump won Arizona. Same story in Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin, states that sent Trump to the White House, but a Democrat to the United States Senate. North Carolina went red in the presidential contest, but again chose a Democrat to be that state's governor. And reproductive rights, of the 7 states that approved abortion protections on ballot initiatives, 3 ultimately went for Trump for president. It's just something to keep in mind for those starting to peek ahead at the road forward for Democrats. Appropriately, one of those Democrats road mapping the party's future right now is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. In a New York Times essay, he writes this, quote, "While others are talking about political strategy and messaging, the way forward is really about focus and action. The next several years are the Democratic Party's chance to show the American people that we will not just run on, but also govern by addressing those core issues that can and will improve the lives of our people. And perhaps the best part, these core issues and concerns are not partisan, and addressing them helps Democrats and Republicans alike. That's a path forward for both the Democratic Party and for the country that we love." Joining our conversation is Democratic Governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to see you too.
Tell me more about the piece that you write. I think people saw it as sort of chicken soup for the soul after Tuesday night, if folks were hoping that the results would be different.
Well, I was certainly disappointed by those results. I supported the vice president, and I think she ran a really hard race and tried her very best. My piece is not about looking back on the election, but forward. It's that idea that when people wake up in the morning, they're not thinking about politics. They're thinking about their job and whether they make enough to support their family. They're thinking about the next doctor's appointment for themselves or their parents or their kids. They're thinking about the roads and the bridges they drive each day, what traffic's going to be like. They're thinking about the public school they drop their kids off at, and they're thinking about public safety in their communities. And see, if you don't feel secure about those things, you don't get to anything else. You don't get to whatever the issue of the day is in Washington, D.C., and you don't get to any crazy thing that a politician said today or yesterday. And so my piece is about recommitting to waking up every single day and showing the American people that this is what we're focused on. That yes, we'll stand up for important values. We'll push back against discrimination. We'll try to expand opportunity all over the United States, but people should know that every day we're working on creating better paying jobs, reducing the cost of health care, making sure our roads and bridges are safer, creating a world-class education for our kids, and making everybody not just safer, but feel safer. Those are just those core things that regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican or an independent, that you have to feel satisfied and secure before you can reach anything else.
You've mentioned safety and feeling safe and security. Just say a little bit more about where you think the Democratic deficiencies are on those gut issues.
Well, I think we have to recognize that you can't just give folks statistics about where violent crime is. You have to listen. You have to listen about whether people feel safe. Because at a time when we're talking not just about physical health, but mental health, if you don't feel safe in your community, it has a real impact on you. And then we've got to make sure that we take steps to address those concerns. So when we think about the different path forward, I hope we're always listening first, that we are talking to people and not at them, that we meet folks where they are, and we make sure that we don't summarily ever dismiss how somebody feels. Even if we disagree with it, we hear them out, and then we try to find that common ground, and we apply common sense. I wrote in my piece how Donald Trump just won Kentucky by 30 points just 1 year after I won it by 5 points. And if you look at it, inflation's actually gotten better over that period of time. But I think in Kentucky, when I ran, people saw that not only did I support policies that would create new jobs, but we were actually doing it. We opened the cleanest, greenest recycled paper mill in the country in Henderson, Kentucky. We're building the 2 largest battery plants on planet Earth in Glendale. And while people might not believe what politicians say or what's in their platforms, my ads had me standing in front of those 2 massive facilities, and people certainly believe what they can see and feel and touch. But it's about priority, and it's about focus. If we're talking about what Donald Trump said today and the issue of the day in Washington and jobs, we're only talking a third of our time about jobs. And so when people see how we spend the time that we have to communicate with them, they just got to see that our major priorities are the things that they care about the most.
Governor Beshear, it's Donnie Deutsch. So nice to talk to you, and congratulations on being so successful in such a deeply red state. A lot of it, I believe, and because if you really kind of decipher the campaign, we've talked a lot in the media, oh, they're lurched too far left, but in reality, in many ways, they were talking about the meat and potato issues. They were talking about, solving problems. But they weren't hitting in the gut. It wasn't connecting to people. And is part of your success, just that we talked about this in the last segment, this human ability, that the message can be there, but you got to hit people in the gut. And the Democrats were just not, they weren't connecting, in a nice Jewish word, people's gestalts.
I think it's a couple of things. And one is just ensuring that, again, we're talking to people and not at people. We are listening to their concerns and not trying to, quote unquote, correct what they're saying. If people are worried about inflation, even if it's coming down, we ought to meet them where they are and talk about different ways that we can save them money. I froze our gas tax in Kentucky to give people a little bit of relief. I was able to cut property tax, especially during the times when it was hard. Yes, inflation was still there, but they could see action, real action, and see that I was trying my best to address their concerns. But the other thing is recognizing the difference between policy and then showing a result. The signing in the Rose Garden just isn't real to people because it hasn't actually created that job yet. And so making sure that we get out and own these good policies when they create good jobs, that you're there not just at the announcement, which is the hope, but when there's a ribbon cutting, people view it as this kind of performance. But all those jobs are there. You walk into the facility and it's built. People's lives are fully changed. And yes, there are people that will always vote this way or that way, but I believe a large part of those that are left are just voting on who they believe in their gut will provide that better life for them, give them that chance to get ahead a little bit more. And so I'm not looking backwards. I'm looking forwards. Every single day for the next couple of years and further, we've got a chance to do that. We've got a chance to be the party that does it. And like I said, the best part of all this is it's good for everybody. I mean, if we espouse the values as the Democratic Party and then have the focus on those core issues that lift everybody up, we won't just appeal to undecided voters. We'll hopefully create the grace and the space to talk to some who might have voted a different way in the past, but see a better life ahead.
Governor Andy Beshear, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us about what you wrote. We need to fit in a very short break, but we'll continue to turn to you. We'll be right back. As Michelle mentioned earlier in the hour, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asked the split ticket voters among her social media following why they voted for her and Donald Trump. As our friend Michelle said in her piece on MSNBC.com, it wasn't the most sophisticated method of surveying voters, but the responses were swift and candid. Things like this, quote, "I feel you are both outsiders compared to the rest of D.C. and less establishment." Quote, "I wanted change, so I went with Trump and blue for the rest of the ballot to put some brakes on him." Quote, "Both of you push boundaries and force growth." Quote, it's real simple. Trump and you care for the working class. Quote, I feel like Trump and you are both real. You are focused on the real issues people care about, similar to Trump populism in some ways. Quote, you signaled change. Trump signified change. I've said lately, Trump sounds more like you. We're back with Michelle and Donnie. Wow, Michelle. Of all the compliments Trump doesn't deserve, that he sounds like AOC feels like maybe near the top.
That must have created some sort of vertigo for her, Nicolle, to see that. But yet it's instructive. You know, you had asked what the Democrats need to do now. I'm tempted to quote Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones. You know, in that last episode, he says, what unites people? Is it gold? Is it armies? Is it flags? No, it's a well-told story. And Democrats have to figure out how to tell a powerful story that actually reaches people. And, you know, when I listen to Governor Beshear talk about what people feel in their gut, in doing that, you know, they also have to be honest about the other headwinds that they face. We've been talking about the economy, but in doing whatever kind of after-action forensics they do, they also have to be willing to try to figure out how and to what extent deep-seated biases may have played into this. You know, people have a certain sense of what authority looks like in this country. All you have to do is look at the CEO class to understand that. And so, to what degree were people just uncomfortable sending a person of color or a woman or a person who is both those things, you know, into higher office? And in order to tell that better story, they've got to understand the headwinds in order to do that.
Donnie?
There's a very twisted irony to the AOC talking about Trump and why they voted for both people. And I'm going to talk about now middle-of-the-road voters, okay, swing voters who go back and forth between your ex-boss, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Some of the policies of AOC are the problem. It's not going to be popular on this network when you say things like, you know, stop funding Israel or keeping Amazon from moving into Long Island City, and some very extreme left policies. You lose the party. Now, I know there are people in this network that, you know, I'm not going after AOC. I'm telling you that part of her as the brand of the party is part of the problem of the party. The party needs to be centrist. And yes, you want a welcome tent for everybody, but AOC, and I would listen to, and these are suburban voters, I'm not talking about rich voters, just suburban voters, they would use AOC as a reason, well, that's where the Democrats are. Democrats are not going to win. If she is the voice of the party, if she is the image of the party, we got problems. And I'm just telling it like it is.
Well, but I think that the experiment she undertook was trying to understand how someone, say you're right, who feels the way, she must see herself similarly, right, as being a vanguard on the left. And so I think what she tried to understand is how you could vote for me and Trump.
Right.
And I think that the aha of her experiment is that it has nothing to do with policy. Right. Isn't that the answer? I mean, yeah. How do you vote for AOC and Trump, even if you accept what you just said, which I'm not sure I do?
She's talking about the people in her district. That is a very, okay. Yes, the people in her district voted for her authenticity. Her authenticity is not necessarily good for the entire range of the project. So she is in a very, very, very narrow base, a very extreme side of the base that is problematic for the entire party. I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to do a postmortem on a party that needs to move to the middle and needs to be symbolized by certain issues that are middle-of-the-road issues. Throw me off this network. That's just where we got to go.
I got no interest in throwing anybody off that is having these conversations, because I think you feel some discomfort criticizing AOC. I think the beauty in what AOC did was to be the experiment. Right? I mean, Michelle, what I saw in her responses was, let me understand you, and God bless anyone responding with curiosity. I mean, that's the gift that keeps on giving, because I don't have any answers, just questions. And I think what Donnie is articulating is this experience of understanding people that should have on paper been attracted to everything that Vice President Kamala Harris did and the way she ran her campaign, but that weren't. And for those people, AOC isn't the answer. But I understand the gift of what she did was to shine a light on this piece that you're getting at, this piece in the gut, which is very hard to reveal to a pollster, which is very hard for anyone to reveal until they're in the privacy of the voting booth. And I just wonder if you can say more about the importance of understanding the answers to the questions you asked about gender and race.
It's key, and it's something that it's hard to talk about because pollsters don't ask that question. You know, they don't, how comfortable are you with a female president? There are very few pollsters who actually answer the question in that way. And one of the things that's clear when you look at the election results, and whether it's the AOC experiment or what happened with reproductive rights initiatives across the country, people voted to preserve reproductive rights and yet also voted for Donald Trump and voted for Republican candidates who were trying to strip them of those rights. This was an a la carte election where people were sending very mixed messages. And so it's very hard to discern very quick answers, a very quick solution to what to do to go forward. This is going to take some time to actually really understand, you know, what happened. The thing that was refreshing about what AOC did is that she decided to get out of the way and let voters have a voice. You know, where we've spent a lot of time in the last week trying to understand what happened and often talking amongst ourselves and not giving a platform for voters. We haven't heard enough of them. And I think that that's a voice that we need to figure out how to create pathways so that we can listen to people and that we can share those stories more with people so that we understand what's really going on in this election. And that will help light the way forward.
And you do that by elevating her experience, which I do. I think it's fascinating.